and welcome to the Edupedia World. In this tutorial, we are going to study about generics. So this tutorial will cover Introduction to Generics and this is part 1. So let's begin. Firstly, we'll see what are array lists and arrays. An array list is like an array of an object, but array uses the syntax. So when you see these brackets, so these brackets are used by arrays. And when we talk about array list use object syntax. That means we have to declare it as if we are declaring an object of a class. The array list expands as you add things to it. Arrays can hold primitives or objects, but array list can only hold objects. To create an array list mylist equals to new array list. This is a syntax how we can create an array list. Or since an array list is a kind of list, we can also do that list mylist equals to new array list. To use an array list, we have the method like add, set, and get. So these are some of the methods that we have already seen while studying the introduction to collections. ArrayList then and now. So this talk about how ArrayList has evolved in Java and what are changes have been brought from Java 5. So it says, starting in Java 5, ArrayList have been generalized. That means every place you used an ArrayList, you now have to say what kind of object it holds, like this. So when we do ArrayList and when we put this bracket of greater than and less than sign, and in that we just put the type which we want to store. So over here we are storing string. So this is the array list of string. So you can treat it as when we declare an array, then we have to define like which type of array it is, which data it will contain. So it can either be a int array or a string array. In a similar way, you have to tell like which kind of data this array list can contain. Although the generics will not give you an error if you do not declare your, make it a generic type, but it will definitely give you a warning. Your Java compiler will give you a warning. So if you do that, it would be better and your code will become compiler safe. So it's always better to add a generic type with your list or with your any of the collection type. Okay, so that was the purpose of adding generics in Java 5. So if you don't do this, you will get a warning message, but program will still run. Now we'll study how autoboxing and unboxing are related to generics. Okay, so let's do that. Java won't let you use a primitive value where an object is required. You need a wrapper. ArrayList integer mylist equals to new ArrayList integer. Mylist dot add new integer 5. Okay, so you over here you can see that we have declared an ArrayList which is taking integers as a type, and then you are adding new integer. So whenever we need to add a new integer, you can either do that by using like new integer 5. So this will make sure that only the integer is getting added. Similarly, you can't use an object where primitive is required. You need to do an unwrap. So if you need to fetch a element and you want to store it into a int which is of a primitive type, then you need to do unwrap by casting it to integer and using a method int value. Okay. But then from Java 1.5, this makes it automatic. From Java 1.5, you do not need to cast it. So you can simply do, like for example, my ArrayList integer mylist equals to new my ArrayList integer. And then you can simply add 5 by using mylist.add 5. So this will simply add number 5 to your ArrayList. Fine. So you see that the auto boxing happens automatically. So auto boxing for itself state that it is automatic boxing. So you do not need to do any cast. Fine. And in order to receive an element, you can simply use a get and simply pass which element you need, and like this will give you the index number. So 2 is over here, the index number in the get method, and this will give you an element on the index 2. Other extension makes this as transparent as possible. For example, control statements that previously required a boolean, if while do while, can now take a boolean also. There are some subtle differences or issues with the equality test though, and we see that. Okay, so this was something we talked about autoboxing and unboxing, how generics is related to that. But as per the definition, what is generics? Well, a generic is a method that is recompiled with different types as need arises. Okay, so the bad news is instead of saying list words new array list, you'll have to say list string words new array list string. Fine. And the good news is replace runtime check with compile time check. No casting instead of string title, then you can cast the string and keep it as words.getI. So that means that no casting is required. Instead, you can use simply string title words.getI. So even if you don't cast it, it's okay, fine. But you have to define which type of array list it is. If it's a string type, then you can enter only string type and retrieve any of the string type. Okay. Some of the classes and interfaces that have been genericized are vector, array list, linked list, hash table, hash map, stack, queue, priority queue, dictionary, tree map, and tree set. Fine. Now, let's see what are generic iterators. An iterator is an object that will let you step through the elements of the list one at a time. List string, list of strings equals to new array list string. For iterator I, list of strings dot iterator I dot has next. So over here you can see firstly we have declared list of strings. Okay, list of strings is my list, is the array list which can take string. After that, to iterate through the list, that means to traverse through that array list, we actually need a iterator. So that's why we have created a iterator, which is iterator I, and we are calling a method iterator on list of strings. So when we call that, it gives us an iterator. Okay. So it is giving me iterator I, and in order to move forward, I can use the hasNext method of iterator. Therefore, I'm using I.hasNext to move forward. So it will not just move forward, rather it will, keep on checking whether there is an element in the array list. So if there is an element, then hasNext will return you true. Otherwise, it will return you false. So if there is an element, then it will go and, compile or execute this line. Over here, it is simply traversing through the next element by calling next method and then printing yes. So this is how you can use an iterator to traverse an array list of a generic type. Iterator have also been genericized. For example, list string, list of string equals to new array list string. For iterator string I, the list of strings iterator. So over here you can see we are also, even though we have genericized the list of strings as string, but we can also do the same with an iterator. Okay. So by doing that, we are making sure that this iterator can only be used to contain the string elements. Okay. If a class implements iterable, you can use the new for loop to iterate through all the objects. Fine. Now writing generic methods. Well, you can see first method that we are having is private void print list of strings. So the input that it is taking is list, which is of a generic type string and list. Okay. Now in a for loop, we are actually using an iterator and using list.iterator, I.hasNext. In SOP, we are simply printing the next elements. Okay. The method should be called with a parameter of a type list string, but it can be called with a parameter of type list. Fine. The disadvantage is that the compiler won't catch errors. Instead, the error will cause a class cast exception. It is necessary for backward compatibility. Similarly, an iterator need not be genericized as an iterator string. So that means if your compiler won't catch an error, it will, either give you a class cast exception if you try to enter something else instead of string. Fine. And also it should be backward compatible. So even if you are not putting a genericized list, it should be compatible. Okay. So far we have seen a simple iterator. Now let's see something advanced in generics, which is wildcards. Now let's see what are type wildcards. Fine. Okay. Here's a simple method to print out any list. So you see in this method we are simply printing private void print list, and then we are passing list as a parameter, and then we are iterating through the list using an iterator and printing that element. The above step works in Java 1.5 but generic warning messages. Okay, but you receive that warning messages that this is not a generic list. Okay. Java 1.5 incorporates lint like clint to look for possible problems. You should eliminate all errors and warning in your final code. So you need to tell Java that any type is acceptable. So it is always advisable to remove that warning. But obviously it is up to the programmer because warning will not impact your compilation or running, but it is always advisable to remove that warning. Fine. So to remove that warning, you should generalize your list by, telling your compiler that which kind of elements this list can take. So either a list can take a string elements or an integer elements, so and so. Fine. So let's say if you're not sure, like, which elements you want to actually put on, so you can use a question mark over here. So if I do private void print list of strings and do this list, then question mark list, similar thing in iterator. So this is acceptable, but what do we mean by this question mark? It is not denoting a string, this is not denoting an integer, then what is it? Well, it's a type wildcard. And what is type wildcard? Well, let's see before that writing your own generic type. Okay. So when we say that writing your own generic type, so over here we just define a variable called as t. Now what is t? T is to define your own generic type. So this is something like, for example, I can define a string, I can write a integer, but what if I want my, list to take string and integer both? Fine. What if I want to customize it? So T will give you an option to customize the type of element that your list can take, or similarly your class box can be of type. Okay, so you see over here how we can write your own generic type is we have to declare a class, and since we have declared a class box, then we have to also declare which type it can have. So that's why I have declared T. Then similarly, my list can also contain the contents of the type T. Then over here you can see when I'm doing add things, then I'm also using T as a parameter. That thing is of a type T that is getting added to my list. Similarly, if I want to grab something, then I'm using a grab method and I'm returning T from it. Some recommendation is to use single capital letters such as T for type. So whenever we have to denote our own types, we use the letter capital T. If you have more than couple of generic type though, you should better use names. Okay. So this is something which is recommended by Sun. And this is for new for statement. So guys, since we are covering, touch basing each and everything like writing your own generic type, similarly wildcard. So this is just an introduction. We'll be covering again, this is since a part 1 which is introduction to generics, when we'll be covering as a separate topic what are wildcards and how to write your own generic type. We might also be running a program in our Eclipse IDE to do the same. So this is just to give you a feel like what are these and how to do them. But we'll be actually showing you that how can we do that. Okay. Now for statement. Okay, new for statement. So we'll see what we can do with for statement. Well, it's talking about for each loop. So using for each loop, you can actually traverse an array or a collection as we have seen in some of our previous tutorial. So my real array is actually a array over here of a float type, and then we are taking float x, which is a x variable of a float type, and then we are calculating some real sum by adding x to the sum. Okay. So for collection that implements iterable, instead of using, iterator, you can even use a for each loop like this. So over here you can see that we are having a class object timer, task object is task. So this is task is a local object of timer task class which is for each view, and then C is the collection. So we are taking out each element from this collection one by one, passing it in task, and then task is applying some method onto it. Again, for the next element, it will keep on traversing. So instead of using an iterator, we can also use for each loop. Okay, so this is again a statement that is showing you, like, instead of this for loop, you can even apply this for each loop. So this is absolutely replaceable by this code. Okay, so the disadvantage is only you don't know the index of any values. So because if you want to traverse to one particular index, then you cannot do this, because you won't know what is the index value. But if you want to traverse the whole of the array, then this is definitely the choice to go for. Now, creating an array list the old way. The syntax of creating ArrayList has changed between Java 1.4 and Java 5. For compatibility reason, the old way still works but will give you warning messages. So here in the old constructor, you can see we are having java.util.arraylist, and then we are having ArrayList vector 1 equals to new ArrayList. So constructs an ArrayList with an initial capacity of 10. So if you are not passing any initial capacity, it will take the default capacity, which is 10. After that, ArrayList vector 2 equals to new ArrayList, and you can pass your initial capacity also if you want to change the initial capacity, increase or decrease it from 10. And what is the new way of creating an array list? Well, it is using an angle bracket and providing the type, that is using generics. So over here we are doing array list string vector 1 equals to new array list strings. So this will take the types of string. We can also pass the size. For example, over here we have initially passed the initial capacity. Now to get the old behavior but without the warning message, use this as a wildcard. So this is the purpose of wildcard. So wildcard will prevent from getting the warning messages, but if you are not sure like which type of elements you want to enter, you can rather use this wildcard character, which is a question mark. Okay, now accessing with and without generics. So let's see this one. It says object get int index. So this returns a component at position index. Then using get the old way. ArrayList mylist equals to new ArrayList. Mylist dot add some string. Fine. Then mylist dot get 0 will give you string. Using get the new way. Okay, how is the new way? So new way, we have created an array list with generics, and then we can add any of a string to that. And to get the string, we do not need an cast. So we can simply do get 0 and we'll automatically get a string out of it. Okay, so notice that casting is no longer necessary when we retrieve an element from the genericized array list. So I hope so it is clear how casting is not necessary because we are using a genericized array list. Okay guys, so just summarizing the introduction. So when I say summarizing the introduction, that means it was still an introduction. We haven't, did a detailed example of any of the generics so far, but we'll be doing that in our part 2 and touch basing each of them in detail. So as of now, this was an introduction. Let's, summarize it. So if you think of a genericized type as a type, you won't go far wrong. Use it wherever a type would be used. So it's always advisable. So ArrayList mylist will become ArrayList string mylist. And new ArrayList will become new string, new ArrayList string. Fine. Public ArrayList reverse ArrayList list becomes public ArrayList string. And similarly, in the reverse method, you are also passing in genericized ArrayList object. The advantage is definitely instead of having collection of objects, you can control the type of objects you want to insert. And the disadvantage would be it would become slight more complex and slight more typing would be required, which I think is okay because it is giving you much more advantages. So okay guys, that's what about this tutorial, which was introduction to generics. We'll cover the detail in the next tutorial. So stay tuned and thank you.